It's quite early there.
Yeah, it's quite early. What time in your country?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So a good time for me.
Bu Susi, wifi-nya trouble ya.
Yeah, she's disappeared.
Yeah. How are you, Profesor?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
How's everything there today?
Yeah. Or maybe we can while waiting Ms. Susanna join in this meeting. So because the time is now right now is 7 o'clock in Indonesia. So how is Pak Bangun? Is it okay if we start the class?
It's fine by me.
Yeah. Hello.
Would you like me to start?
Sorry. Wait a minute, sir.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Okay, I will ask the student, Mbak Rizka, is the students now
Bu Yanti.
joining this class? It's okay? All the students?
Yeah, we still wait for some friends to join because it's still 10 participants. Or can we ask for a few minutes maybe to wait for Bu
Susana, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 more minute, please.
Yeah.
Mbak Rizka mungkin bisa ngebel Bu Susi.
Okay.
Hello. I'm so sorry because
yeah, Alhamdulillah.
yeah, because my internet is trouble, so I have to change another. How are you, Prof?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. Thank you.
It's quite early in your country.
Not as early as it is for you.
Yeah.
So it's 10 o'clock in the morning here.
That's good.
So
it's okay.
Yeah. All good.
So good. No problem. Okay. Already 7 o'clock, right?
Yeah, there was a request to delay a bit because some students were still arriving.
Okay. Just wait for them for a while.
Yeah. You just let me know when you'd like me to start.
Okay, no problem. I will tell you. Bu Yanti mau tanya, Bu Yanti.
Yeah. Professor, how is your class? Is still running in this pandemic era?
Yeah, actually, in Queensland at the moment, there's no shutdown, but our university, Griffith University, really has all lectures. All lectures are online, so no, unless it's a very special lecture, no face-to-face lectures, but the design studios and practical work, I mean, that's all face-to-face. So there are students in the design studio every day and teachers there every day. But other than that, yeah, it's much the same. The university is much quieter now because a lot of people, because there's no face-to-face lectures, you know, a lot of people just connect from home or wherever that might be, and the staff, for the most part, either pre-record their lectures or they give their lectures live from home, like this. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But life goes on.
Yeah, hope that pandemic would be over.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're starting to, Australia is starting to change its requirements about things. So just yesterday, the Prime Minister was announcing some new provisions for international travel with a vaccination passport, as they call it. So I think soon, you know, people will be able to travel back to Australia again. Though at the moment they're still saying there's even if you have a vaccination and a passport, that there'll be quarantine requirements for 2 weeks when you arrive. So you only will be coming to Australia if you want to be here for a long time.
Yeah, should be. We should extend our stay in Spain for 2 weeks more. Okay.
Yeah.
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 What about Indonesia?
Indonesia now still lockdown.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there are still many people affected by the coronavirus.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I-
we did our lecture. It's like in your country, from home. So
Yes.
everything will be done at home.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with the changes here, what is supposed to happen is when 70% of the population are fully vaccinated, there will be some easing of restrictions, and at 80%, even more easing, but hopefully by 80%, most restrictions will be removed. So, you know, the country overall's about 30%, 30 to 35% fully vaccinated, you know, and some states are higher. I think in New South Wales, they're nearly 50% fully vaccinated. So we'll see.
What kind of vaccine do you use? What kind of vaccine?
I
Sinovac or Moderna?
had AstraZeneca.
Okay.
And my daughter is having the Pfizer vaccine. So which one do you mainly have in Indonesia?
Sinovac.
Oh, Sinovac. Yeah.
Yes. But right now, government also use Moderna.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's just arriving in Australia too. Yeah.
But I think it's quite strong because the response of our body.
Yeah.
It's really we can feel the impact of the vaccine in our body.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have fever and then dizzy, and also feel like catch a cold. So our body is not really comfort.
No, no.
And it takes 2 until 3 days.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Uh, Prof, is it possible for me to get the document that I already asked to you as this?
Oh, didn't you get it?
Uh, uh, can I get some document? The one
Yes,
that I
yes,
wrote
of
you.
course, of course.
Okay.
Did you get the one from the lecture the other day?
Mungkin Bu
Yeah,
Ati
not
mungkin.
yet. Yeah.
Oh, look, what I sent was you should have received an email
Yeah.
saying
Oh,
you had access to the document
Yeah.
with a link to the to Google Drive to be able to download the document.
Okay, okay. Later I will check the
Just
Google
check,
Drive. Okay, okay.
and I will do the same today. But the elements today is even bigger, I'm afraid, because there's quite a number of video segments in it. But I'll send you the video segments separately. Hello,
oh,
is
Yeah,
everyone gone?
yeah.
So,
Okay. Maybe Prof. Shatter
yes.
to maybe it's better to start, yeah, because the student, all the student
Slowly
coming now.
arriving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy to start.
Yeah, please, Prof. Shatter.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen.
Yeah.
Just share and play. So let's move that. Sorry. So good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be with you again today. First of all, can you see the screen okay? Can you see my
Yes.
slides?
Yes, it's
Yes,
very
we can see
clear.
the screen.
Okay,
Yes.
and you can hear me okay, obviously?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very
So
clearly.
look, I'm really pleased to be with you again today. And I'll be talking about some urban design issues in Australia. And in particular, I wanted to focus on this idea of contested identity and ownership. You know, this is an increasingly important issue in Australia. So the way I'll be doing that is thinking, first of all, about urban design and its meaning to us. And in talking about that, looking at some of the ways that urban design is thought about in Australia, but then the main way that I'll be exploring this idea is by looking at some examples of urban design in Australia, and particularly urban design in public places in Australia. So I'll be looking at 4 examples of urban design in Australia. But first of all, I wanted to think back about the nature of design more generally, but urban design as well. And I wanted to bring up and talk about very briefly Claire Cooper Marcus's book, House as a Mirror of Self, exploring the deeper meaning of home. So this probably sounds like it's a fair way from a discussion about urban design, but I think it's particularly relevant to think of this work and this idea where Claire Cooper Marcus poses the idea that that our house is really effectively a reflection and an embodiment of our personality. So what she says, as we change and grow throughout our lives, our psychological development is punctuated not only by meaningful emotional relationships with people, but also by close, effective ties with a number of significant physical environments beginning in childhood. So, you know, this is, and that quote is not just about houses, but it's about all the environments that we occupy and live in. And, you know, we can find some really beautiful examples of people thinking of houses as themselves. I think someone has their microphone on and I'm getting quite a lot of interference here. Hello.
Mohon dimatikan dulu itu ya. Siapa itu ya? Mohon untuk bisa di-mute yang lain. Okay, please.
Okay. So, you know, this is a really beautiful illustration of a person drawing, you know, themselves as their house, but already even without the head involved, you know, we have this archetypal picture that people draw of a house where we have two windows and a door in the middle, which are very much like our eyes and our nose. So, you know, the notion of house as being an embodiment of our personality is an incredibly central thing to our psyche, even if it's subconscious, as Claire Cooper Marcus says here. People consciously and unconsciously use their home environment to express something about themselves. I think the same, and many writers and people thinking about the city believe the same of the city, where the house is the embodiment of our individual psyche. The city is the embodiment of our collective psyche. The city is where we create and manifest our community identity. It is where our collective soul is revealed. So cities, I think, are an extraordinarily important artifact that we create collectively, that is communities, that is groups of people from different countries, with different beliefs, with different social practices. The city is collectively the artifact that most represents our cultural beliefs and inheritance and practices. Now, one of the problems with this, and this is where we come to this question that I want to talk a little bit about today, is quite often we make plans, we have visions of what our cities might be, and we develop designs. We develop whole ranges of ways that we conceptualize the future of our environments. But sometimes, actually quite often, I think, those plans, those visions can be outstripped by either, in the end, our willingness, but more often we like to blame our capacity to realise these aspirations. Or, you know, there are conflicting aspirations by different groups within our community, and this is provides a real tension, provides a real range of issues that we have to deal with in relation to urban design and the design of our cities and on an ongoing basis. And in particular, I guess, it gets represented by the difference between public interest groups and private interest groups. And what I mean by that is by a broader range of interests of the inhabitants of the city compared to perhaps the private interests of commercial groups or companies or developers or such people, you know, who may very well have very different desires about what the nature of the city should be to what it should be for people. So in Australia, and I guess Indonesia and, you know, generally around the world, we have a range of urban design guidelines. So they are only guidelines, typically. They aren't prescriptive. We also have city plans that are prescriptive, but city plans tend to be primarily prescriptive about land use, about movement, prescriptive about more pragmatic issues, perhaps, than some of the more personal, the more intrinsic and value-driven issues that we might consider through the processes of urban design. So in Australia, we only have guidelines for urban design. They're not mandatory guidelines. They're simply ways that people might start to contemplate urban design. So there's a range of guidelines that we have. We have national guidelines, and we have state guidelines, and we can look at these in a little more detail. I won't dwell on these too long, but Australian government agencies come together, and the Australian government, through its various bodies and institutions, has an overall guideline about the quality of our environment called Creating Places for People. So this is quite an old document now, but in need of infrastructure, and it's being created by these government agencies and departments. In addition to that, each state typically has a set of urban design guidelines. So they're all quite similar in a way, and of different ages. And primarily they're about the values that are important to us in our built environment. So as well as state by state, there are also non-government bodies, national institutions, foundations, alliances and councils that also have various guidelines for urban design in Australia. So, the Planning Institute of Australia, in conjunction with the Australian Local Government Association and other bodies, has created healthy spaces and places. The Heart Foundation has a guideline about creating healthy neighbourhoods, and the Council of Australian Governments has criteria for capital cities in terms of its guidelines. So if I just go back a sec, in Queensland, we have this Q design, which is a relatively recent guideline. And I'm going to just have a bit of a look at that in slightly more detail now. So the Q design guideline was produced in 2018, so it's a relatively new guideline. This work was undertaken by the Queensland Government Architect. In Australia, most states have a government architect, and their role is primarily an advisory role. It's not a design role per se, but they do help to establish policy. They do help to establish vision, and they do produce documents such as this that establish guidelines around urban design. So I have some segments out of the Q design guideline, and you can see here what it's trying to do is capture the notion and the nature of Queensland as a place, looking at the people that live here, looking at the physical and qualities of place, looking at the experience and the lifestyle here. So, one of the things that has always been very high on the agenda in Queensland is outdoor space. Queensland has a benign climate, a very mild climate. It doesn't get as hot as Indonesia, and but it doesn't get as cold as many places. So right through winter, typically the temperature throughout the day frequently is up to 20 degrees or slightly higher than that. And we're just coming out of winter now into spring, and already we're getting days that are 28, 29, 30 degrees. And winter compared to summer is relatively dry, so the skies are clear, and everyone likes to get outside and exercise and picnic and barbecue and ride their bikes and so on. So, those are important qualities that are represented in the urban design guideline. So this is at South Bank. This is actually quite close to the centre of the city in Brisbane. But there are other things that are important. So, the Smart Cities Plan, thinking about growth, thinking about livability and change in our environments. So the Queensland guidelines, the Q design guidelines, have these 9 elements, 9 elements of vision to do with, first of all, the first 3 deal with context. So to be climate responsive, be inspired by local place, character, form and culture, work with and enhance natural systems, landscape character and biodiversity, establish the second set of criteria is around establishing a strong structure. So that's not about the structure of an individual element, but the structure of the urban pattern and so on. So creating well-defined, legible and connected streets and spaces, creating great places for people to live, to deliver diverse development forms and density, to embed opportunities for adaptation and change. And then finally, in the last of the vision areas, to demonstrate leadership, lead by example and engage effectively. So one of the really important things, I think, with a lot of our public design here these days is engaging with the community, getting a community response and community input to projects. So the last of these is just showing you how, one of these types of vision elements is illustrated. So this was vision element number 3, about working with and enhancing natural systems, landscape character and biodiversity. And that in itself then breaks down into a series of ways that you might achieve that. Working with, number 1 on the right-hand side is working with established ecological and hydrological systems, and so on. So this is a fairly typical of the type of guidelines that you'll find across Australia. In Queensland in particular, there is a really strong focus on exterior environments because of the nature of our benign climate and response to climate. So the physical context is really incredibly important in our vision statements, at least, though that isn't necessarily always reflected in the design outcomes. And this is where this issue between design policy and design vision come into conflict, if you like, with the potential to actually realise the outcomes that you desire, and looking at the players involved and the financing and the political framework has a real impact on this issue. So just thinking about some of the things that are happening in Australia at the moment in relation to this idea of identity. I've talked a lot about identity from, I guess, both or primarily a Western perspective in Queensland that relates to this idea of context and so on. But increasingly in Australia, in terms of planning and policy, Indigenous identity is becoming important, and that's increasingly being considered and reflected in urban design as well. So I have two projects that I want to look at in relation to Indigenous identity. One is in Alice Springs in the centre of Australia, and one is in Perth. So the project in Alice Springs is a mall, is a pedestrian street that recently has been redesigned and rebuilt with the inclusion of Indigenous people, local architects and local artists and so on. And the same for the Perth one. So both of these projects were recognised and were on display in the Venice Architecture Biennale, in the Australian submission to the Venice Architecture Biennale. So it was the Australian contribution was called In Between. And what it was about was looking at how Indigenous identity, Indigenous qualities were being engaged in a range of contemporary Australian projects, and some of those were urban designs projects. So, you know, thinking about storytelling, preservation, country, knowledge and language. So in Australia, and it included for the Venice Biennale and consideration of projects both in Australia and some of our Pacific neighbours in the Eastern Pacific. But this map is showing all the different bits of, and our Indigenous people in Australia refer to not states or not cities or settlements, they refer to country. So these are all the different bits of country identified by the different Australian Aboriginal groups, different mobs. So that's another key word here. So next I have a short video that shows some of the qualities of these two projects as they were presented at the Venice Biennale, thinking about this Indigenous identity and how that translates into qualities of urban space.
This meeting is being recorded.
Whoops. Sorry, I've gone back now. I just might just along a little bit. So this first project is in Alice Springs, as I said. And the second project is in Perth, in Western Australia. So that was a little abstract. So we're going to look at both these projects in a little bit more detail. So in relation to the Alice Springs project, a significant component of the project is the development of these shade structures through the central area of Alice Springs. And the shade structures are based on the Yeporenier moth, which actually has come from these caterpillars. So in Indigenous culture, this part of Australia was created by 3 caterpillars, and there's a series of places around Alice Springs that are the homes and sacred places for these caterpillars. And then the mythology has that the moth came from the caterpillars. So these are photos by a local artist in Alice Springs. And it was a bit hard to make shade structures from caterpillars, so they decided to use the moth, and the shade structures were developed based on that image of the moth with outstretched wings that you can see on the right here. So in addition to the shade structures themselves, there is a series of artworks, including one that took the largest shade structure and used the moth motif to cut out elements in the shade structure. But here it talks about the 3 ancestral caterpillars of the Rente people, the Ayaperene, the Nyakle, and the Undarengate caterpillars, and the process for making these shade structures. Alice Springs, of course, is an incredibly hot and dry place, and the shade structures are also part of the public art program. They have a very strong public art program in Alice Springs. So this is looking down on the central shade structure, which is made up of 3 larger moths. And then it has this pattern of smaller moths that are cut through it to create shade on the ground. So one of the really interesting things about this project, I think, is how it engages with the natural landscape. So the tree on the right-hand side is right in the centre of Alice Springs, and it's the most culturally significant tree to Aboriginal people in central Alice Springs. And the tree on the left-hand photograph at the end of this street is out near the river, the Todd River, which runs past Alice Springs. And while it's called a river, the Todd is actually, for most of the year, for most years, in fact, simply a dry creek bed because there's so little rain there. But one of the things that the architects did, Sue Dugdale and Associates, was to really think about water and what happens when water comes to this place, and connecting the river down near the tree down near the river, rather, with the tree in the central landscape. So in the left-hand photograph, the tree near the river is the one we can see in the distance, and the tree in the central area is just on the right of us. So Alice Springs is a very, very small city by Australian and international standards. There's roughly 20,000 people that live there. But you can also see the shade structures running along the street there. And then in the central photograph, there's this water sculpture. So when it rains, this area fills up. The water trickles down between the bricks from the landscape into a sort of representative desert landscape, and it flows along to the central very shallow pool that you can see in the right-hand photo. So all around Alice Springs, there are these clay pans, and when it rains, you get these very shallow flat pools that form. So a really significant part of this project was to engage with the local culture and landscape. And these are sort of elements, detailed elements from those shade structures, from the moth shade structures that you can see here. And you can see the structures have different qualities in different locations. They have seating under them and a variety of sort of elements like that. So this was at the opening of the new mall and its elements. And on the right, in addition to the shade structures and new paving and patterns and a new landscape through the area, there was new seating. So this seating that you can see in the foreground is in the shape of a caterpillar laid down on its side, crawling along the ground. There's a really nice element too. But again, another view of the shade structures through the mall area. So I think that's a really great example of where identity has been considered and really successfully integrated into an element of urban design in a significant public space in the city. And in the case of Alice Springs in particular, there's a very large Indigenous community. So being able to engage with that community and represent that community through these new public urban design works, I think is an extraordinary result. This second project is a project in Perth, and it's designed by a national firm, Lyons, and a local Western Australian practice of architects, Erdal Pedersen Hook, and the landscape component was contributed by Aspect Studio. So again, I've got a little video here that runs for about 4 minutes that talks about the development and the nature of this project.
Yagan Square really connects the city and brings together the many elements of WA with the stone and the concrete, all the while respecting that Indigenous culture.
What's really beautiful about this project is the narrative of the local Aboriginal people, Indigenous story, interwoven and interconnected into the site in a way that is very distinct and very apparent.
Has been a city long divided. The CBD, nightlife and cultural precincts have had a whacking railway line through the middle of them. The next project joins the dots. Mark, you and your team solved a complex urban problem here.
That's right. We had the train line coming through here, which for 100 years disconnected our cultural heart of the city to the city centre itself. By opening this up, now you can see people are moving through this space. But not only that, we've got this great cultural destination for people to enjoy. We've got these restaurants, we've got cafes, we've got lawn areas for people to enjoy, all of these things, which is much more than just that physical connection.
There's not many civic spaces where you're elevated up above the rooftops here.
No, that's right. It's a bit of a feat to achieve this because it's a very complex area. We're on top of the railway line. And so to get a really meaningful space like this is a great outcome. This space has to operate at the kind of larger civic scale. So we have large scale performances in this area. This can hold up to 2,000 people for large events and performances. But what's important is that it works at that scale, but it also works at the more intimate scale. So you get these little quieter moments throughout the project as well.
We set out to design a really unique bit of landscape and architecture, and part of that started with taking all of those people that are thriving and now have access through between North Bridge and the city and from the rail, and trying to bring them into the middle of Yagan Square. So we talked about it as a heart. I mean, a really important part of our design process was a collaboration between Lyons, Erdal Pedersen Hook and Aspect Studios, and that idea of an integrated landscape, art and architecture is really what makes Yagan Square so vital.
Yeah, and I think a key part of that was the way in which we were working with the Wajak working group around understanding the complexities that we could actually bring to this place. It's about bringing these elements together in this constellation of pieces that sit in this place and start to make it what it is. And I think as part of that, the integration of the art piece by local artist John Tarry really talks about a passage of water from this higher area here, and it comes down the pathway, it reappears again, and then comes bubbling up here down the bottom.
The water source has been a big part of the Yagan Square story, and the importance of water to this particular area, knowing it was the wetlands many years ago before the development all happened in Perth. The canopy above us has a shape of the lake when you see the old map, so it's a big part of telling that story of this is what this place was. The digital tower at the back replicates the reeds that are in the water. There were 14 of them that acknowledge the 14 Noongar clans inside of the Greater Noongar Nation. Bringing that story back to be a pivotal part of Perth is really important. It's a pretty special place. I know when I brought my grandkids up here, they just loved it. My grandson's 5 and he goes, "Nan, this is the most amazing place." There's nothing like this that tells this story in our space, and Perth's been really fantastic to have this here, which is really a big part of we are here, you know, as Aboriginal people. This is our country, acknowledging that through major development today. On the opening of this process, and the people involved said, "Carol, they listened to us."
Yes, this project is about establishing a new connection to the city and, of course, the remarkable technical feat to build this landscape on top of the 4 rail lines that stand below us. But what really stands out for me is the sincere collaborative process that the designers have introduced, working with the Aboriginal people of this area to really bring their stories to life.
So, I mean, there's a range of the designers there talking about the conceptual ideas for this place in Perth and the various people that contributed to it. So if we look a little bit more carefully, you can start to see here how this zone sat in relation to the city. So on the right-hand side is the commercial heart of Perth. So Perth is a city of about 1 million people. And on the left-hand side is the cultural precinct. And beyond that, though you can't see it, is a lake area. But running through the middle where Yagan Square is, which is in the foreground here, is the main train line, the main access to the city. So the large rectangular building sitting immediately behind Yagan Square is Perth's Central Railway Station. And one of the key important aspects was to be able to make, as they talked about in the video, this connection from the commercial to the cultural precinct. And that primarily happens down in the bottom. There's a continuous pedestrian plaza that runs from left to right, right to left, across the bottom of the square precinct. And in addition, there's new vehicular access to the train station. So the vehicular access, the car access, goes up above the train line. So we can see that better in the next slide, which is a plan. No, first of all, another one of the things that the designers looked at was the geomorphology of this place and these different layers and how they might be represented through different materials. And you can see that in this type of elevation, working up through the strata of the site. But getting back to what I was saying before, in this plan of the square, this upper level plan, first of all, you can see running down the left-hand side, the continuous pedestrian access across the square, which connects the commercial and the cultural precinct. And then you can see the sort of U-shaped roadway that provides access up to the train station. So the train station isn't illustrated other than its front wall, but the train station is immediately on the right of the square. And then the square provides this really, I think, extraordinary central place in Perth, offering opportunities for small performances, offering opportunities for eating, drinking, and entertaining, place for kids to play, a green element, but primarily through all these things, making a connection over the train line which runs underneath. So the train station on the right here, you can see the vehicular access up to the train station, the primary elements in the square, and the pedestrian connection on the left-hand side from top to bottom, bottom to top, connecting those precincts over the top of the train line. And as they said in the video, the shape of the canopy is in fact the shape of the original billabong, original lake that existed before this area was developed. There's some records of the original landscape and topography, and other elements also reflect those sorts of qualities. Here in the the bottom left, you can see the tower, which, as was said in the video, is made up of 14 vertical elements that metaphorically reeds in the water, but represent each of the Aboriginal communities that used and occupied this land historically. So this is from the pedestrian walkway looking up through the square to the train station, which you can see sort of below the bridge across this end of the square. Another view from that end of the square through the pedestrian link. And then looking at the canopy and water features, and the canopy covers an outdoor performance space. Other views of the square, the vegetation just young. This is a fairly new project in Perth. You know, recreation and cafes and so on. And then this is on the right-hand side here, the lighting tower and the communication tower, the media tower with the 14 reeds and the capacity to be lit and shown in different ways. So, you know, one of the really interesting aspects of the space is this focus on lighting and using the lighting as a sort of art and media piece in itself. So these are some views of the canopy over the amphitheatre space. And I have another short video that looks at the concept and the development of the lighting design, or shows the lighting design. And then just some last views of this water feature that runs through the site. So these shallow ponds at the top of the site, you know, with this water that then runs down through the site to this lower area that kids can play in, but provides a respite from the surrounding traffic, provides you know, the sound of running water, the noise of running water, and so on. So I think both these projects, the Alice Springs Mall project and the Yagan Square project, are really two terrific projects where, first of all, in Australia, we're starting to respond to and recognise and engage with Indigenous culture, which has been very long overdue, I think, not recognising the first Australians, not being respectful and attributing to them their rights and acknowledging the importance of their culture and the way that it can contribute to a contemporary circumstance and culture. So on the one hand, I'm very encouraged by our changing attitude about identity, our changing circumstance in relation to Indigenous people and Indigenous culture. And I think these are great examples. And why these have been achieved, I think, is primarily because in this circumstance, or in those two circumstances, government has accepted its responsibilities in relation to design and policy. So in both these cases, I think there has largely been an alignment between the vision, an alignment between urban design policies and the outcomes. You know, these things have been carried through in a successful way, and interests of commercial interests perhaps, or other types of narrower interests haven't prevailed in these circumstances. So a couple of really fine projects. I wanted now to talk about two other projects, one in Sydney and one in Brisbane, that I think there are a lot more questions about in a variety of ways. So the first one is the Barangaroo development in Sydney, which is a really significant piece of public space in the centre of Sydney. And there's a range of really terrific outcomes that have resulted from that project. But there's also some more questionable things that have happened along the way. And one of those is the intervention of this gentleman here, James Packer, who is one of the richest people in Australia. He was until recently the head of Crown Casinos and the Crown Group. And through his intervention, the building on the right was created, which is a new Crown Casino and Crown Residences that forms part of the Barangaroo development. But I have a video, and this is quite a long video, so we'll just watch part of the start of it, but it's about the development of the Barangaroo project in Sydney. So it locates the project, it gives its history, and starts to look at the development of the project. But we won't look at all of this. So the whole video, and I'll make this available to you that you can look at, is nearly half an hour long. But we might look at perhaps the first 10 minutes of this.
Sydney Harbour, the centrepiece of Australia's premier international city. Its glimmering body of water is a focal point for both locals and visitors.
You cannot imagine any place that's got such a beautiful harbour, such incredible beaches, some of the most beautiful landscapes you can imagine in the world right next to the city.
Sydney is just, no wonder, one of the most livable cities in the world.
The flow of cargo in and out from the Western Harbour wharves provided the economic lifeblood of the city and the nation for over 150 years. But after the turn of the 21st century, changing technology and economic demands saw the working harbour moved out of the city, presenting a unique opportunity for a reimagining of the area.
I felt there was a once-in-two-century opportunity to take the former maritime industrial lands and link them up into, again, a recognisable group of headlands.
The opportunity to turn this back into a living, vibrant, dynamic part of the city was something that couldn't be missed.
There's nothing quite like it that's been done in Australia previously.
Some of the international experts who've come here do say this is, the #1 urban renewal opportunity internationally.
Almost a world first and a world only opportunity, and it is something you really want to take advantage of.
This is the story of one of the most ambitious urban renewal projects in Australian history, transforming a 22-hectare former container port into a vital new dimension of this global city.
Whenever you're trying to do something major in a city, it's controversial.
It is a very unique site that provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the city, and it is one of those where politics should be put aside.
If you're doing something as big and bold and strong as what we're doing here, if you didn't upset some people, we would have failed.
A site like this, its development, you get one shot, you've got 200-year life minimum, you need to get it right.
Rich in history, the harbour has been home to the Indigenous people of Sydney for many thousands of years. Located on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people, the Barangaroo precinct is named after a powerful Aboriginal woman.
She was a fisherwoman, but she was also an elder by the time that she married Ben Long. And she was very highly regarded and highly respected by the people, so they would look up to her.
Before European settlement, a great body of Aboriginal people here lived in the more intimate part of the harbour, where the headlands were closer. Barangaroo and Bennelong owned Goat Island. Aboriginal people would canoe between the islands because it was only half a kilometre to Ballast Point, to Balmain, to McMahon's Point, to Ball's Head and to Barangaroo.
I think Captain Arthur Phillip might have thought that she was going to be a bit of a pushover, but there was no way in the world that Barangaroo was going to be a pushover for anybody. There is a story where Ben Long was invited to go to Parliament House, and while Ben Long was the dandy, if you like, and dressed up in the English fineries, she just refused to wear clothes and she went along. She wanted to continue her culture, Aboriginal Gadigal culture. She wasn't going to be swayed to take on the new European culture at all.
As the landing point for the first European settlers, Sydney became a working port and hub of industry and the centre of the national economy.
Originally, this area became poorly built commercial wharves from the 1830s onwards. The plague came in 1890 and the government resumed all the land and bought all the wharves. All the wharves which faced Darling Harbour were knocked over by the Maritime Services Board in between 1958 and 1962. And the reclamation, filling in Cockle Bay and cutting the headland in half, was the biggest reclamation in Australian history.
With the waterfront stretching 1.4 kilometres along the harbour foreshore, right on the western fringe of the Sydney CBD, the site represented an historic opportunity for transformation.
The Premier of the state at the time, Bob Carr, made a decision that the stevedoring operations here was ending its lease period and was moving to Botany, and it was time really to look at the reuse of the site.
First step was to at least alert the government and the cabinet that there was a better idea than simply handing it over to some foreshore authority to sell the land. Maybe the city deserved something better. So I approached Premier Bob Carr about 2004. The cabinet had, and the bureaucracy had no idea really what the scheme would be or how it would unfold, but simply that the cabinet had agreed that half of it would be open space.
50% for urban development that was part of the city, 50% for open space, public spaces, green areas, parklands. What the government did is announce that they were going to have a global search for ideas for this site. A competition was therefore arranged with the world's best architects, designers, an open competition, anonymous. I was appointed the chairman of the jury for that. And we had a mix of people representing community groups, representing business, representing broader international design initiatives as well. We had some 150 entries and we narrowed them down to 50, then down to 20, and ultimately down to 5. The value of this was it presented the community and the government 5 fundamentally different ways that the site could be developed. The site as a container terminal had a long, straight, 1 kilometre long concrete slab, almost like the 3rd runway at Sydney Airport. And some of the jury members thought that it was very important to change that. So we went back to the more organic flow of Sydney Harbour with bays and headlands. Others in the jury thought we must add to this bit of heritage, and I didn't see it as heritage, but this big concrete slab, and treat it as a part of the city and build on top of that. We ended up choosing a winner, but we put some conditions to that winner, which basically said we didn't want the straight line. We wanted some bays, a headland park, a hill that was really more symbolic of Sydney Harbour itself.
The preferred ideas and concepts from the competition were evolved into a plan submitted to the New South Wales Government in 2007. The plan divided the site into 3 distinct areas.
I think the idea of segmenting the whole site into 3, South Barangaroo, Central Barangaroo and the Northern Headland, was a smart move.
So we have a new financial centre in Barangaroo South, and there's a wonderful natural space just north.
Following an approved concept plan, the search began for a company to design and develop the commercial precinct at Barangaroo South. A selection process produced 2 clear contenders, Brookfield Multiplex and Lend-Lease.
You don't get too many projects this scale, and while it might have the rights to build it, you've still got to secure tenants.
There's not many projects that change the skyline. Barangaroo will change the skyline of Sydney, so it is hugely significant.
One of the criteria was sustainability, and we actually challenged the developers to create a climate positive outcome for all Barangaroo.
There was a final assessment and the winning proposal was contracted and agreed with Lend-Lease.
I think as an urban regeneration project, it's pretty perfect, to be honest. It's got an economic engine room at the south, highly sustainable, globally significant and so on, so it's making a statement for Sydney. But then that is helping to pay for a fabulous public space for the ratepayers of New South Wales. So it's, to me, the best of both worlds.
The approved concept plan and subsequent development proposal contained elements that not everyone was happy with.
What's happened here is a corporatisation of the public land.
The City Council felt a little bit strange because the government was running this, not the council, and that led to another tension as to, you know, wouldn't it be better if we ran it and not you?
There was a controversy around the hotel positioned over the water.
The original Lend-Lease proposal to government was for a hotel on a pier on the harbour.
All the assessors said, look, that's stunning, that's something special, we should do that.
It was also important to a lot of people who felt that it was incorrect, it was wrong, and that that edge shouldn't be broken by a hotel pushing out into the harbour.
I don't believe the original tender should have included part of the harbour, and I want to see that hotel move back onto land. Then the negotiations we're trying to have with Lend-Lease.
The massive Barangaroo project on Sydney's waterfront has been scaled back. After months of criticism and controversy, the company in charge of the project, Lend-Lease, has made some big changes.
We've managed to maintain the same open space area on the project whilst bringing a hotel off the water and placing it on shore.
Major kind of criticisms we've had about the relocation of the hotel is the loss of public space. And so often that criticism is not founded in knowledge of the reality of what's being delivered.
The fact that there was a site to be dedicated to a hotel came together with a proposal separately lodged with the government by Crown for...
Okay, we might leave it there. But you can see, you know, this has been a huge project in Sydney, and there's some really interesting aspects to it. So this is a plan of the site as it more or less exists today. And what we can see here on the left-hand side is the public parkland, the organically shaped and edged hill. So one of the really interesting things about this project was what effectively happened at the left-hand end of the site here was to recreate the original headland. Interestingly, this new headland hill is made from sandstone from Sydney, but it's a hill that is hollow. So there's a huge space underneath it that still isn't really occupied. It's used as car parking space at the moment. But interestingly, none of the competition proposals, and indeed, at least initially in the subsequent design, ever proposed returning this piece of the site to appear the same as the original headland. And that whole movement was championed very much by the previous Prime Minister, Paul Keating, who appeared in the video, and he was the strongest and in the end a successful advocate for making this part of the site return to appear as it did as a headland before settlement in Australia. And you know, in retrospect, I think this is a sort of intervention that's been a really positive intervention. This is a fantastic piece of the site. It's a really delightful park, and despite its sort of artificial recreation of a natural place, it really is incredibly successful. Down the right-hand end of the site, you can see the three main commercial towers, the International Financial Centre, then some lower rise development in the middle section of the site. And on the waterfront in that middle section of the site, number 9, I think it's labelled, is the Landmark Hotel, which has moved off the water and onto the main part of the site, as discussed in the video. And the hotel is probably the most controversial element on the site. So it's controversial, not perhaps so much in terms of its physical form, but the way that it came to be realised and developed. So as they talked about in the video, the site overall was developed and controlled by a development group in Australia, Lend-Lease, who have also done lots of projects in Indonesia, a big commercial developer, primarily around retail space overseas. But the hotel in this instance, as I said at the beginning, was developed by Crown Casino, and particularly through the efforts of James Packer. So the controversy around this hotel is in that there was no public process to deliver this building. There were direct negotiations started by James Packer with the New South Wales government, and the New South Wales government awarded Packer this project without community input and without seeking to look for projects from anybody else. So this is the site as developed now. The sort of southern part of the site with the 3 towers and the hotel has really been developed a lot more than was originally envisaged. The original competition schemes and indeed the original proposals from Lend-Lease had a much lower level of development. So the existing city, central city area still had views out across the harbour rather than being screened from the view from the site. The site has been able to largely maintain the 50% public place, but in this particular circumstance, we have ended up with this, I mean, some regard it as a beautiful sculptural building, but a casino that and private residences that sit on the site that have become a new icon for Sydney. So I think there's some question about the nature of this building, the qualities of this building, and how we might want to represent this Australia and Sydney in particular in this city. You know, other views of the site with this extraordinarily scaled building on the site. So in this case, you know, there has been here a very significant contest, I guess, between private interest and public interest, between commercial interests and perhaps the greater good of the broader community. The last project that I want to look at is, in a sense, a similar type of project taking place in Queensland. So I'm just returning very briefly to the Queensland Urban Design Guidelines. So talking about people, experience, place, lifestyle, you know, this set of vision statements, including, you know, thinking about natural systems and landscape character and biodiversity. So these are very central to the design guidelines, this notion of a connection to the external environment, responding to context and climate. So this project, this last project, is called the Queen's Wharf Project. So it sits adjacent to the Brisbane River, adjacent to the main commercial CBD of Brisbane. And George Street, as marked here, is really the main street on which a whole range of public institutions and facilities sit. So up the top, the northern end of George Street is where all the courts sit, the Supreme Court for Queensland, the Magistrates Courts, the district courts. So courts, once upon a time, where the Queen's Wharf precinct is along George Street, were government departments. So there was Treasury, departments of agriculture and so on. So significant departments. And down the southern end of George Street, in the sort of grey area in between the river and George Street, are the Houses of Parliament and other government offices. And to the right of that, you can see the original Brisbane Botanic Gardens. On the other side of the river from Queen's Wharf is South Bank. So that's a cultural precinct for Brisbane now. And that leg of the river. That stretch of the river is really the city's primary public place. So this is looking towards the CBD, and you can see on the left-hand side is South Bank that I talked about, and on the right-hand side is the Brisbane CBD. So this is quite an old photo. So this was taken before any of the South Bank works were undertaken. And one of the things that occurred in Brisbane was that in the early 1960s, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Clem Jones, was focused very much on transport and access to the city. So all along this western edge of the city and along the edge of the river is a freeway. So first of all, on the right is a bridge that brings you across to the peninsula that the CBD sits on. And then the freeway runs along the entire edge, western edge of the city. So one of the issues for Brisbane has always been a connection from the city down to the river. Originally, the South Bank precinct on the other side of this reach of the river was an area for commercial shipping. And for many, many years, again, up until the 1950s, actually through to the early 1980s, this was an area where commercial ships came and docked in Brisbane and unloaded their cargo, and was an area, I guess, at a smaller scale, but a bit like the area where the Barangaroo development has taken place in Sydney. So in the early 80s, this precinct, Brisbane made an application to hold a World Expo, and Brisbane was successful in having World Expo 88. And during that period, the whole of that South Bank precinct was redeveloped. The shipping all had moved downriver to the mouth of the river. There was no longer any commercial shipping coming here, and it turned into a cultural and recreation precinct. So this again is a few years ago, but this is the recreational precinct across at South Bank. There's a lot of public park, and there's this wonderful swimming lagoon, beach swimming lagoon that is a free swimming lagoon that's open to the public. You know, in the middle of this photo, the right middle of this photo is a new government building, a huge new government building. And sitting in front of that, the little horizontal white stripes of the freeway on the other side of the river. So we can't see the river here, but the river sits in between this swimming lagoon that comes almost down to the edge of the river on this side, and then the government buildings on the other side of the river. So for many years, there's been a desire, if I just go back, a desire to replace the freeway with new development and enable the city to come down to the river and to make a connection across to South Bank and reclaim that space as public space. So there have been a number of competitions and so on to think about the area in between this new government building, this big new government building that's been built, and the large sort of rectangular building towards the left of the screen. And this has been what Brisbane has called North Bank, looking at how you might engage with the freeway or remove the freeway and make a new public realm that connects the city to the river. It's been a long and ongoing project, and there have been a variety of attempts to engage with that project. So the most recent attempt is what is called North Bank. So this isn't quite the same angle of view, but this is a view from South Bank, from the swimming lagoon across the river to North Bank. And that large government building is just shown as a light shadow here. It's been removed so that you can see the extent of the proposed new North Bank development. So this is another case where not Crown Casinos, but the Star Group, who are also a casino group, have in the end been able to persuade the government that they are the people to create this new development. So it really outstrips the scale of other buildings in the precinct. On the right-hand side here, with the palm frond just touching the top right of it, is our Parliament building. At the base of that is the Parliament House, and these are the parliamentary offices for members of Parliament. But most of this new development are high-end apartments. The very large curved building at the centre is a five-star hotel, and it also has casinos in it. So I have another, and this is the last of them, short video that explains this project. In this view, they've taken the freeway out, though the freeway will actually still exist, so it's running over the top of these spaces. So that is, Brisbane's latest piece of urban design. So that project is well underway in terms of its construction, and the completion date is anticipated at the end of I think halfway through 2023. So there's still a couple of years to go in terms of the construction for that project, but it's well out of the ground. They've started and they're well underway with the new pedestrian bridge connecting the precinct to the cultural centre on the South Bank side of the river. And it's a major project. I think the construction cost in Australian dollars is $4.5 billion, that is Australian dollars. So it's an enormous project, and it's going to have an enormous impact on the city. And, it raises, I think, really significant questions about not perhaps the physical form of the building, though maybe about the physical form, but I think there are really significant questions about its relationship to the set of values and criteria that form part of the Q design document. How it really relates to the outdoor lifestyle that we talk about here, and the climatic response that is part of that Q design document. So look, I'd like to just finish by returning to these sort of questions that and ideas that I raised at the beginning or earlier, that the city is where we create and manifest our community identity. It is where our collective soul is revealed, and we really need to be vigilant in our contemplation of identity and how we realise that identity in the process, and trying to ensure that our vision and our identity are really realised through our efforts to build our city and create new urban design environments. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, more than happy to take questions, and I'll just, if I can find it, stop sharing now. Did that? Yes, there we go. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Shatter. Please, who will ask? Mr. Edo. So please, Edward. Hello, Pak Edward.
Yeah, I'm just giving applause to.
Hi. How are you, Edward?
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good, good.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. So you have a very nice presentation about the urban design in several cities in Australia. And yeah, I wonder, one of the most important thing is how the people or the community could participate in such kind of a design or project. So according to the experience in the urban design, which you have showed to us in several cities. So do they, I don't know, maybe the government or the designer try to ask the participation of the community in such kind of project? Are there any kind of implementation for such in those kind of? I think it's a big project in the Brisbane that you showed us lastly. Okay, I think that is my
question.
How to is it possible to make the
look? I mean, I guess
participation?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes and no. And indeed, you know, that is my question. You know, how do we, as a community, maintain our vision and engage with the public? So, for the projects I showed you, there's a variety of different ways that that's occurred, and in some of those projects, I think it's been very successful, and in some of those projects, it hasn't been very successful. So, I mean, first of all, with the two projects for Alice Springs and Yagan Square I showed you, in both those projects, there were aspects of the projects about engaging with the community. So, as the projects progressed, there were presentations to the community, and the local government authorities in those cases sought feedback from the community, and there was a response to the feedback from the community. So, you know, and I think in both those cases, the designers and the government and the people that implemented the projects really tried to engage and respond to the comments from the community, as well as, and this is a key thing, I mean, you know, historically, Australia, in its design of our cities and in design of our major public environments, has completely ignored the Indigenous culture. So, you know, this is a huge turnaround for us as a country, that now, finally, you know, we are starting to make that connection and be thoughtful and, you know, responsive to that really important culture that has existed in our country. So, you know, that's one way. In the case, and you know, I think in the case of the Sydney project, you know, there's been again the opportunity for the public to make contributions to that project. So, you know, one of the contributions, one of the things that occurred in that project was, originally there was the hotel that was proposed to be jutting out into the harbour over the water, and you know, along the way there was a really significant public outcry about putting the hotel out into the water in the harbour. So that's why the hotel was removed and put back onto the land. So, you know, in a sense, that was a win for the public. But then the government simply worked with Crown Casino and Packer, and they did whatever they wanted. So, you know, it's what we say in English, swings and roundabouts. You know, sometimes there's a win and sometimes there's a loss. And I think the same is the case in Brisbane. You know, there have been many schemes proposed for North Bank, and indeed, you know, many years ago, there was a number of inquiry by design. Are you familiar with this term? So there were a number of projects that were inquiry by design where the public participated, where the whole community had a voice in trying to help think about what should happen on that site. And there were public competitions as well. So, you know, there was a broad participation and input of ideas through that sort of process. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, they typically were usurped by a state government that favoured business, and business that wasn't interested in those processes. And, the government has been through negotiations where they've appointed a developer for the site, and then there's been a community outcry and the developer's been sacked and so on. And that's happened over, 20 year. And this latest development is again, basically, there was a limited competition. So there was 5 developers that made proposals for this site, and then the government selected one of those proposals. But that process really hasn't had much public input. I think the public have just got too tired. So when finally there was a new proposal for this site, people just wanted it to happen. So I don't think it's the best proposal. Personally, I think that, such a focus for the city around a casino development is really very sad. I don't want that to be a representation of the culture that I live in, but that is the case. So there we go. But I think most major projects now in Australia, there are requirements to have public consultation, to seek public response, to respond to it, and most projects that occurs. But whether in the end the government actually does anything about it or not is another question, because once the developer gets onto site, the developer has such power and influence that they can get away with doing a whole lot of things that weren't agreed to in the first place. Yeah.
Okay.
I think the project in Brisbane, it's as I say, it'll be interesting to see what the outcome is like, because there are a lot of public spaces and there will be good public outcomes as part of it. Yeah.
So it's good to maybe kind of evaluate such kind of.
Yeah, we'll see when it's finished. Yeah. I think it's quite interesting for us that, one of the things that I think is that, in Australia, it's the colonial settlers, that are now finally recognising the Indigenous people in some ways, which I think is really positive. I think, the challenge that you have in some ways is the Indigenous people recognising in places like Kodalama and Semarang the value of the colonial past. Yeah. So it's reversed in a sense.
Yeah. What we could learn from each cases.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Leigh. So it's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. Hope to see you in person sometime.
Yeah. Soon after the pandemic. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Edo. Next, Putri Iskandar. Putri, yeah, please.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Morning, Professor Safar.
Morning.
I'm interested for your presentation. It's beautiful design. Okay. Before I question the point your presentation, I want to introduce myself. My name is Putri Iskandar. You can call me Putri. And I want the question about government policy. What is explain again? Maybe could you explain again to me or us about what is the government policy to the support create the beautiful design? I see your presentation have 4 projects. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, and all the project is a beautiful design, and that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Look. I mean, I think for smaller projects, and the first 2 projects were smaller projects. The government controls those projects all the way through. So, you know, it is publicly developed, as it were. So the government appoints a builder and the government manages those projects. Whereas the 2 larger projects, in particular, the government relinquishes some of its control on those projects. I mean, in Australia, the notion of what I would call privatized development for major public projects is, you know, the most common way to develop those major public projects. And in that circumstance, what happens is that what was traditionally public space and owned, the end outcome was owned by the government, become projects where it's semi-public space, where the space is owned by a private developer. So, you know, they have control on who uses and how the space gets used. And the government is not as involved in the detailed development and the final outcomes of the design for those spaces. And I think, you know, one of the difficulties of urban design in a contemporary society, and I have no doubt it's exactly the same in Indonesia, is finding this balance between the public good that might be represented by the government and private interest that primarily has the money and the capacity to undertake these projects, and bringing those together in a balanced way to achieve outcomes that are working both for the public and working for the private developer. So, you know, it's a very difficult thing. So, you know, this is what I was alluding to with this issue about ownership and the community as against corporations or commercial interests.
Yes, I want sometime, someday my government something to about that. And one question again.
Yeah, no problem.
How is the community response about design, the project design?
Well, it's mixed. You know, I think I think for the project, for all of the projects, there are people that are really positive about the projects, and there are people that are really negative about the project.
Yes.
I think with the 2 first projects I showed you, there's a much larger and a majority of people are very positive about the projects. For the 2 second projects, the big urban projects, the one in Sydney and the one in Brisbane, there's a much larger number of people that are fairly negative about those projects and about the way that they've been realised. You know, I think both those projects still have really positive aspects. I mean, the reality is the project in Sydney, 50% of the space is public space, is public parkland. So, you know, that's a really positive outcome for the city. And in Brisbane, you know, it'll be a really positive outcome that there's new connections to the river, that you're much better able to come down to the river where that project is. But there's some really negative outcomes too. So it's trying to find a balance.
Thank you, Professor Safar.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next, Ayu Komasari. Please.
Thank you, Bu Susi. For Professor, thank you for your presentation. It was so interesting and very wonderful. I want to ask you about, for you, there is any challenge to revitalize the Alice Springs CBD? Because as we know that we must combine that Aboriginal identity. And the second question is, for does the city development with the waterfront concept in Aussie also implement the water sensitive urban design program that recommended by government? And could you explain us about this program? Thank you, Prof.
Okay. Look, first of all, in Alice Springs, clearly there's been a very strong engagement with the Indigenous community about the development of that project. So there are a lot of, recognition of their stories, but there were a lot of Indigenous leaders and people directly involved in helping to develop the ideas and the design for that project. Is that what you were wondering? Is that your question? Yeah.
Yes.
And then in the case of the other projects, and indeed for all projects, I mean, issues around sustainability and ecology generally are really important. So, for all of those, for each of those projects, there will have been consultancy people that are looking at the use of water on the site, the collection of rainwater and the use of rainwater, looking at wastewater runoff on the site and how that is used, and looking at wastewater from the buildings and the projects on site, looking at how those sites interact with and engage with the waterfronts, with the river in the case of Brisbane and the harbour in the case of Sydney. So, I haven't specifically talked about those things, but increasingly there's regulations and laws that demand in Australia that you respond to those requirements and you act in relation to those requirements around water. And indeed, there are policies about water sensitive design that, and not just policies, but regulation, laws that need to be satisfied and fulfilled. Yeah.
Okay, Prof. Okay, Prof. Thank you for your explanation.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Ariska, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Susi, for the opportunity. Hello, good morning, Mr. Shatter.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Okay, let me introduce myself first. My name is Ariska. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Those are very great projects to show. Well, I'm very interested in landscape design because I think a good landscape implementation also helps to make a city more livable. And talking about the urban design and livability, I read some news that the most livable cities in the world at 2021, some of them are cities in Australia. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm not wrong, they are Perth and Adelaide. Yeah, okay. So I would like to ask I would like to know for your opinion in more detail. Beside the good architecture, are the Australian citizens or society also contributing or participating to make their city to become more livable? If so, how do they do that?
Okay. Look, I think they are. I mean, I think the city that I live in, Brisbane, is a subtropical city. So, I mean, at a government level, you know, there's always an increase in park space. So, you know, one of the focuses, I guess, in Australia, in Brisbane in particular, but Australia generally, is on outdoor lifestyle. So, I think that you know, when I first moved to Brisbane, it was a little bit like camping, you know, permanent camping. So a very loose relationship between inside and outside. You lived sort of outside and inside, and there were outdoor spaces. And I think, you know, historically in Brisbane, people planted very few trees in their gardens, in their houses, whereas now there's a much denser landscape through the city because people plant a lot more trees. People are a lot more interested in their gardens and the external space. So I think people contribute directly to the livability of a city, first of all, by how they treat their own private external space and encouraging trees and vegetation in that space, but also the demand that they make of the city and making new spaces for people. So, I mean, another example in Brisbane, for example, is there used to be a golf course quite close to the city that was a public golf course. And it really hasn't been used by that many people in recent years. I mean, I guess there's quite a few people that use it, but compared to the number of people that might use it if it was a different type of public space is very small. So the city council is closing the golf course and redeveloping it as public parkland, you know, with a whole range of different type of activities, areas for barbecues and picnics and you know, places for kids to play and bike paths and water features and so on. So it will become a big parkland place. So, you know, these places have been really important to not just Brisbane, but cities around Australia. So landscape is there's a huge shift, I think, in Australia generally to have better landscape in our cities. And that, I think, contributes really significantly to that question of livability.
Thank you very much for your explanation.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Is there any more else? No more? Okay, I think there's no more questions from the students. Maybe Bu Yanti, do you want to ask something to Prof. Sutter?
Okay, thank you very much Bu Susi and Prof. Sutter. I am very interesting with your presentation, and by your presentation we realize that we have to pay attention the identity of our city, especially in this about the indigenous aspect. And you have explained that the indigenous is not about only people with their cultural background, but also the nature. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
very interesting. And sometimes we do not think about that. When we have a project, for example, we usually just think about the people and the culture, but the nature, such kind of land, and also what binatang itu apa? Animal, yeah. We do not think about that. So by listening your presentation, watching your presentation, we now I think we have to start to be more curious about our indigenous potential in our environment. It's my it's my thought. Yes, thank you, Professor Shatter, for your sharing. Yes, it's very useful for our future research. Okay,
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Is there anyone else want to ask? No more? Okay. Because it's already 9 o'clock, I think we have a very long discussion, and it's very attractive presentation from Professor Sutter. I think we are very lucky to have you, and we are very honored to have you here in the very morning, very morning lesson, because it starts at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Only for you.
Only for us.
10 o'clock for me.
Not for you. Okay. Maybe next time I would like to ask you to give us any other presentation, and maybe for the future we hope that we have some research that we could collaborate with your university.
Yes.
We want to maybe we should have consultations, design consultation with you and with other friends, so that we can make our city planning here in Indonesia more beautiful and more attractive, just like in Australia. But I think it's quite long time.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I think you've got lots of, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words.
Yeah. Wait. There's Miss.
Very interesting presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay.
Oh, Bu Susi.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Photo.
Photo. Oh yeah. Before we close our meeting today, I think we have to take picture first. Yeah. Please open your video. Everybody should open the video. Mbak Ariska, please take our picture.
Yes, we still have some participants still turn off their camera, so let's wait for a couple seconds. All the participants, please turn on your camera. Mas Satria, Mbak Asa, bisa tolong di on kamera? Okay, maybe we just kita langsung ambil foto sekarang, Bu.
Ya, ya.
Okay, in 1, 2, 3.
Times.
One more time.
Two times. One more
Two
time.
times. Okay.
Okay.
Everybody smile, please. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Okay, it's done. Bu Susi.
Finish? Okay, thank you. Once again, Professor, thank you very much for joining this visiting professor program. I do hope that we can still have another time to meet in this kind of session, or maybe we could meet face to face in the future, sometimes in the future, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Yeah. Dear all, dear all, I think we have to finish this meeting. Hope that this lesson from Professor Sutter could give you any inspiration and also benefit for, especially for designing the city. Just remember that the city design is actually embodiment of community identity. So thank you very much for everybody. Thank you very much for the participation. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Professor.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Shatter. Thank you, Bu
Bye-bye.
Susi, Bu Ati, Bu Wijayanti.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih, Prof. Atik, Bu Wijanti.
Terima kasih semua adik-adik.
Cindy.
Cindy.
Ya.